Okay, I think we are live, so this is a good time to get started. Welcome everyone to slightly late getting started, but your normal weekly webcast from the Objector Church. We thank everyone out there who's tuning in, and apologize for the technical difficulties. Had a switch of computers at the last minute, some other problems. It happens. But anyway, tonight's program, by the way, your host for tonight is myself, James Branum. I'm one of the ministers of the Objector Church, a religious humanist community dedicated to the focus. We focus on the issues of peace and social justice. And so tonight we'll be talking about some issues that directly touch on peace and social justice, touching on several key issues. One, we'll be talking from more than the world of religion and theology, the idea of hell, and more generally, apocalyptic thinking. I want to make an argument why I think these concepts are negative ones for humankind, why they are not so helpful, but I'm also going to make an argument for why these concepts, why we need to deconstruct them, dig deeper, and look at what their sociological and historical roots are, because there are some unmet human needs that are leading to what I think are some destructive ideas. So we'll be talking about that. The second part of the program, we'll be talking about some other issues, including the issue of the draft, also known as military conscription, the possibilities of that in the United States, and some ways that young people can now take steps to document their views and help protect them in the events of a future draft. And finally, we're talking some about the future of these webcasts and other content being created by the Objector Church. And so we'll be seeking some input from you along the way. Speaking of that, if you have thoughts, comments along the way, I encourage you to post them on Facebook Live. I'll be monitoring this throughout the webcast from time to time. So if you have comments, please join the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're watching this later in recorded format, you're always welcome to send me an email. My email is james@objector.church. And by the way, before we go further, I want to mention if you're not familiar with the Objector Church, you can find out more about us on our website, objector.church. So, that brings us to our topic for tonight, the idea of hell. Now, part of the reason this topic came up for me was an article that a friend sent me. In fact, I believe I have it here handy. This is from the New Yorker magazine, and the article's title is How the Idea of Hell Has Shaped the Way We Think. And this article, by the way, thank you to Rena for sending me this. By the way, the subtitle here is quite interesting too. The article is How the Idea of Hell Has Shaped the Way We Think. The subtitle is For Centuries We've Given Lavish Attention to the Specifics of Punishment and Left Heaven Woefully Undersketched. Now, what's interesting about this article is not just about the idea of hell, but they spend a lot of time talking about other kinds of hell and how these have also been a component of the human imagination, particularly what I would call apocalyptic thinking. The idea of bad things happening in the world might be leading to a destruction of the world as we know it. In fact, it's interesting, it even sinks down to our young people. My son, age 12, he recently told me, as we were going in for him to meet with his math tutor, he told me that, oh, I just wish the zombie apocalypse would come and get over with. It makes life so much easier. I asked him, like, what do you mean by that? He said, well, in a zombie apocalypse, you find your friends, you get guns, and you fight the zombies. Things would be so much simpler. Of course, it's hilarious. I'm thinking, hey, math tutor, and he sounds way better than that. But nonetheless, to me, what's interesting is that he's internalized this idea. People around him, and while it sometimes has more secular forms, such as the interest in zombies, we see, but throughout this, it is this idea of either apocalyptic thinking or a literal hell. And so I want to talk about this a little bit because I think these ideas are interesting for a lot of reasons. More broadly, talking about apocalyptic thinking, bad things to come, I think a lot of that just has to do with this sense of loneliness, despair, angst people are experiencing now and at other moments in history. That doesn't surprise me. The idea of hell, though, to me is maybe more puzzling. And I've thought about this a lot because when you look at world religious history, hell has not always been a dominant theme. Now, before I get into history, I want to talk about something else, though, because I think it kind of will segue into this. I want to talk a little bit about, for those of you watching this who may be coming at this from more of a secular viewpoint, you're not religious at all. this topic may seem weird and inconsequential to you, and I don't blame you. In a lot of ways, this is not such a helpful concept at all. But I think you have to realize that for many people, religious people, people who have grown up in that context, the idea of hell can be a major preoccupation and a major fear, particularly for young people. And I say this because I grew up in a church tradition that focused a lot on hell. Now, this church tradition has many good aspects, and so tonight I'm focusing on some of the negative aspects. I don't want to overstate the case. I don't want to sound like that everything with this tradition is bad. But one of the negative things I would say in tradition was the idea of hell, and the idea that there was a literal hell, and the majority of the human population, historically and present, were bound for that place because they hadn't been saved according to the right way. The church tradition I grew up in had a very precise way of becoming a part of the flock. And hence, if you did it some different way, if you were part of some other branch of Christianity, some other flavor of Christianity, you weren't really a real Christian. And if you weren't really a real Christian, you were not going to heaven. Instead, you were going to hell, to be tortured forever and ever by someone who supposedly is a loving God. Well, this didn't compute to me, even as a teenager. It didn't make sense because I knew too many good people who didn't get saved in the right way according to what I was taught. And yet these folks were good people. And the idea that God would feel the need to torture these people forever and ever as being, even though they're fundamentally good people, didn't make sense to me. But then even for the bad people, the people who commit murder, who commit terrible crimes, okay, I can understand the idea of some kind of divine justice, the idea that, a lifetime of punishment might be appropriate for someone who just spent a lifetime of evil, but eternity? That just didn't make sense to me, and it always troubled me. And as a young adult, it troubled me more and more because I couldn't reconcile the idea of this supposed loving God with the idea of this place of eternal torment. And of course, it was presented to me that there's this path of escape. God has made a way, but yet it's like, yeah, but God created the rules. And if God created the rules, why did he create a system where human beings are bound to fail? For instance, why did you put this tree in the garden? If you want to take it very literalistic, these stories, then like a setup from the get-go. You tell a kid, don't do this. 9 times out of 10, what's the kid going to do? He's going to go there. So it seemed like from the get-go, sin was brought into the world. And then this system of that now to be saved from the sin, you must do these magic formulas, as I would call them, to be saved. And if you don't do it just right, then God is going to torment you forever and ever. That didn't make sense. To me, it made God less forgiving than human beings can be. We all know human beings who have gone through terrible tragedies, who have been hurt in terrible ways by other human beings, and yet have found the way to forgive somehow, some way. Sometimes it seems impossible to me. Sometimes what people I know have forgiven, but they've done it. And so if human beings can do it, why can't God? Particularly when the harms done are not directly towards God, but towards other human beings in most cases. It just didn't make sense. And so as I got older and moved into young adulthood and a little bit past that, I really openly questioned it more and more. And I also just didn't buy it because I saw that most Christians didn't really believe what they said on this subject. In other words, they really believe the majority of the people around them are all destined for hellfire and damnation, then why weren't they doing more about it? And the reality of it is that most Christians don't actually believe this, or they don't really believe it. In other words, they might believe it intellectually, they don't believe it on the heart level. In other words, they know if their own kids did something bad, would they forgive them? Yes. So why wouldn't God do that? Anyway, as I continued to evolve theologically and thought through things and studied them, I discovered something very interesting. And that was, if you look at religious history, and I'm talking about the Western monotheistic tradition. I'm talking about the traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. There's a lot beyond that in religion. I'm not going to talk about that today. The idea of hell shows up in other places in other ways, but the cultural context is so different. I really don't want to dwell on those too much. So I'm focusing on this Western monotheistic tradition. And differentiating also monotheistic to separate it from, say, the Greco-Roman pantheony, differentiating it from the religions of the Druids and whatnot in Europe. In other words, pre-Christian Europe. So I'm focusing really on Western monotheism. But in Western monotheism, the earliest things, look at the books of Moses, the Torah from Judaism, that's later became a part of the Christian scriptures and are now significant as well in Islam. Where is the hell? It's not there. Where is life after death? Not much reference to it, to be honest. And throughout the Hebrew scriptures, the idea of hell is really a non-concept. It really comes up very, very little, if at all. You have to really dig for it. Generally, in the Jewish scriptures, the idea is when someone dies, they continue to live on through the memories of others. Scripture speaks of going to their fathers, but there's no real sense of this divine punishment after death. Rather, whatever bad things happen, whatever punishment one receives for doing evil happens here on earth. And good comes to those who do good, bad comes to those who do bad. That's the general theology, but then there's exceptions, such as, let's talk about the book of Job. Well, you see that whole concept turned on its head. We see that in Ecclesiastes. We see that in other places. So we see some complexity here, some nuance, some frustration, but generally we do see the idea that whatever justice happens here on earth, or happens in the big picture to come, even after we're dead, but it's happening here on earth, not someplace else. Now we fast forward a little bit. We fast forward to the first century of the Common Era, when you have the beginnings of what would become Rabbinic Judaism. We also have the beginnings of the Christian movement, which at this point was still a Jewish sect. And you see these two movements, and now these movements, especially the Christians, is talking a lot about the afterlife, heaven and hell. And we see a little bit later, Christianity really runs with this. And then a few hundred years later, Islam, with its genesis, also deals a lot with the idea of hell. Judaism, hell has been it flares up at times. At the present moment, for the most part, in Judaism, hell is a non-concept. It's not there. It's not even really discussed. It just isn't seen there. But there have been times in Judaism the concept of hell was a popular idea, often talked about, particularly the medieval era. And we see this again in the conversations of Jesus in his Jewish context, the first century CE. You see him talking with other people in that context about the concepts of heaven and hell. So it was present at times, but it wasn't a dominant idea in Judaism the way it would become in Christianity and Islam. Now, if we look at this concept of hell, I would argue again that it is a hurtful, destructive thing. And the reason for that is very basic, and that is I believe that negative reinforcement doesn't work. Punishment as a way to get people to do the right thing rarely, if ever, works. If it did work, then we would have a 0% recidivism rate in our prisons. But that's not the way it is. Most people that go to prison come back to prison, because negative reinforcement doesn't work. Well, and also systematic racism and classism, that's a whole nother discussion. But generally, people that break the rules of our society continue to do so if they encounter punishment. We know this from our children. Most children do not respond well to negative reinforcement. Most parents resort to it at times. Sometimes we feel we have no other choice, but psychologists say generally positive reinforcement works better. And even if negative reinforcement is used, no parent is going to punish their child forever and ever and ever for doing something bad. It is short in duration and focused on correcting behavior. It should not be eternal torment. In other words, what kind of monster torments people forever and ever? I just don't get it. To me, if you have a God concept that involves eternal torment, then that is a wretched God concept. It's not helpful. Now, from our perspective of the Objective Church, we are a religious humanist community, meaning we have a broad range of viewpoints. We have members that are theists who believe in God. We have members who are agnostic and atheists who don't believe in God. There's a fair amount of diversity of views here. And so in one sense, I don't normally speak about an aspect of one religious tradition a whole lot, because again, I'm trying to talk and speak from a more broad universal perspective. But in this case, the hell concept, I think, is important because it is a specific aspect of at least 3 major world religions, and shows up in others as well, that has negative consequences. For a lot of young people, hell leads to some very destructive thinking patterns and some very destructive actions. If you look at the way the concept of hell has been used as a weapon in religious traditions, it's there. It's used to enforce conformity. It's used to enforce obedience, because fear, the powers that be always assume fear works. Reality of it is fear can create people who are visibly subservient. It doesn't create free thinking people. It doesn't create loving people. It doesn't do those things. Instead, it just creates subservience. If it does that, sometimes it leads to outright rejection and rebellion. And so from this religious humanist perspective, I want to be mindful of the value of different traditions. I'm somewhat a religious person myself. I have a lot of I mostly identify with Judaism these days, but I still have a lot of things I draw from Christianity, from Buddhism, from Taoism. So I'm not opposed to religion. What I am opposed to is when religious concepts become destructive, when they hurt people. We need to rethink those concepts. We need to reconceptualize them. In that process of reconceptualization and deconstruction, I think we have to look deeper into why the hell concept exists. Well, certainly history is part of it. We know that Judaism first encountered some of the ideas about hell, I believe maybe in the Zoroastrians, what nowadays is Persian, today is Iran. That was part of the mix, this idea of a dualistic idea of the divine, of good and evil at war with each other. But I think it's also significant. It wasn't just the introduction of this idea from another culture, but it was that at this moment in time of diaspora, of persecution, of oppression, the idea that God would fix the injustices of this world in the life to come, in the world to come, was very appealing. The idea that the people that sent us into captivity would now might not be punished right now, but would be punished later, was an attractive thing. And I think in many ways, this hell concept has been attractive for many people. I think the early church resonated with it because they were being persecuted. They experienced a great deal of persecution throughout the Roman Empire. And so a concept of hell where the Caesar and those who followed him and those who killed the early church Christian movement was very appealing. At the same time, does it really help? I would argue that often hell and the idea of judgment to come has not been so helpful. One of the problems has been this concept has sometimes served to give hope to oppressed people, but more often I think it's been used as a tool to convince people to wait a little bit longer. Think about it this way. In the days of slavery in the U.S. and the American South, white churches spoke a lot about the scripture. They had good scriptures to back them up, to say that slaves be obedient to their masters, but also this idea that even if things are unfair now, it'll be fixed in the later. Then a few generations later, we come to the days of the Wobblies, the IWW, radical social movements, and they were pushing back against religious figures, often who would say that workers, ordinary people, should not be pushing back against mistreatment by the bosses because, one, they need to be obedient to their masters, like the Bible says, but they also were this idea again that whatever good is to come is off out there. That was sung by the early Wobblies, these radical labor organizers. And often what they would do is they'd take these the religious songs sung by the Salvation Army and other groups for proselytization, and they'd take the tune, but they twist it, they'd subvert it a little bit. And so I'm going to, this song is called The Preacher and the Slave, and it was written by the famous Joe Hill, someone who was killed, by the way, I should mention, for standing up for the working class. And so I'm just going to sing a little bit of it, if you don't mind, because I think it really sums it all up. Long-haired preachers come out every night, try to tell you what's wrong and what's right, but when asked how about something to eat, they will answer in voices so sweet. You will eat by and by in that glorious land above the sky. Work and pray, live on hay, you'll get pie in the sky when you die. And the Starvation Army they play, and they sing and they clap and they pray till they get all your coin on the drum. Then they tell you when you're on the bum, you will lead by and by in that glorious land above the sky. Work and pray, live on hay, you'll get pie in the sky when you die. Holy rollers and jumpers come out, and they holler, they jump, and they shout. Give your money to Jesus, they say. He will cure all diseases today. If you fight hard for children and wives, try to get something good in this life. You're a sinner and a bad man, they tell. When you die, you will sure go to hell. You will lead by and by in that glorious land above the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die. Now it's going to get good. Working men of all countries unite. Side by side we for freedom will fight. When the world and its wealth we have gained, to the grafters we'll sing this refrain. You will lead by and by when you've learned how to cook and how to fry. Chop some wood, 'twill do you good. Then you'll eat in the sweet by and by. And that was The Preacher and the Slave by Joe Hill. Song was written in 1911, which would be 108 years ago. Anyways, I'm not going to sing too often. I apologize, but I just couldn't help it. That's a good song. Anyway, though, this song gives a great example of how the message of hell is used as a weapon to keep people down, to convince poor people that, no, you shouldn't fight for justice right here and now, because don't worry, it'll be settled later. God will fix it later. Well, this is just me, but I don't see any evidence of that. Rather, I believe that we as human beings are in charge of our own destiny, and that God, as I understand God, is that God is present in us all. The divine force of the universe is in all of us. And so when human beings unite to work for social justice, to making things better, that's where God is at work. That's where I understand it. Now, you may not believe in God. That's fine. But I would argue that what we have in common is we can believe in humankind. We can believe that we can aspire to something better. In other words, we don't have to settle for things as they are. Another thing I'd be thinking about along these same lines, think about Dr. King, Martin Luther King. We said Martin Luther King Day. In his letter from Birmingham jail, he talked about how that the moderates of his time were more dangerous to him than the Klan, because the Klan, they came out and said they're evil. The moderates just said, wait a while, wait for some justice. You know, you're pushing too fast. Dr. King said, no, we can't wait any longer. Waiting is going to kill us. We have to act now. And that those who tell us to wait are doing us a great disservice. The problem I have with the hell concepts more than any, beyond the violence, beyond the idea that of divinizing this idea of a monstrous deity that would torture people forever and ever, I would argue that the real problem here is that it's telling people to wait. Don't act for justice. Don't act for peace. Don't act to right wrongs. Instead, just wait a little bit longer. Well, I think that's hooey. But what I'm going to say sympathetic towards the people who have the hell concept is that I think if we dig deep, there's reasons why the hell concept has been popular. Why, if you look at socioeconomics around this country and around the world, why is it that many more conservative versions of Christianity, and you look at also more conservative fundamentalist versions of Islam, where and why are they popular? These versions are not popular among people who have it made. They are not popular among those who have enough to eat. It's popular among people that don't have enough, because these ideals are appealing. The idea that things might suck here in this world, but in the world to come, it could be better. Well, I would argue that no, things can be better right now. We have to believe they can be better. And we have to quit looking to the hereafter. At the end of the day, it's a matter of faith, what you believe, what comes after this. But what we do know is that life right now is precious, it's good, it's beautiful, and that it's at the end of the day, it's up to us what we make of it as human beings. So what are we going to do with it? Well, that's what I'm going to leave you with for the inspiration. And in fact, that comes to a good point in this time, because we normally have a ritual at the beginning of our time together. I light a candle and then I read a blessing. It's from the Book of Blessings by Marcia Falk. By the way, I've been mispronouncing it. It was Marcia Falk, not Marcia. But I read this most weeks as a setting of intention, of an expression of hopefulness of what human beings can be capable of. And this blessing is from the Jewish humanist tradition, but I think there's some value here that's much more universal than that. I changed one word in it. I used the word kavora instead of Israel because I'm referring to all of our members and friends. And we're referring to people besides Jewish people. But other than that, the rest of it is the same as her original blessing. And the first part I pray in Hebrew, the rest of it is in English. But what I begin with is I'm lighting a candle here. And again, this is an expression of hope. Candles have always been a powerful symbol of hopefulness, of light in the midst of darkness. It's really, in many ways, one of the most archetypal of symbols. And so I light this candle. And I'm going to invite you, as you're watching this, you're listening, take a moment now. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Then breathe it out. And just be present in this moment. And now I invite you to open your eyes and look into this candle, and I'll read this blessing. Shema kavora la'olot alafei panim melo olam shekinata ribuei paneka ekad. Hear, O congregation, the divine abounds everywhere and dwells in everything. The many are one. Loving life in its mysterious source with all my heart and all my spirit, all my senses and strength, I take upon myself and into myself these promises: to care for the earth and those who live upon it, to pursue peace and justice, to love kindness and compassion. I will teach this to our children throughout the passage of the day, as I dwell in my home and as I go on my journey, from the time I arise until I fall asleep. And may my actions be faithful to my words, that our children's children may live to know. Truth and kindness have embraced. Peace and justice have kissed and are one. So may it be. So I guess more than anything today, that blessing, I'm thinking of it as a bit of a counter thing to the idea of hell, because this is expressing the hope of what the world could be, of what it could be. And this is an imaginative leap. It's hard. The world is pretty rough right now. There's a lot of things around us, a lot of brutality, a lot of harm, a lot of evil that we can see around us. It's easy to lose sight of the fact that something else is possible. But we have to believe. We have to, and I'm not asking you to believe in an abstract God concept. What I'm asking you to believe is that it's possible to do good. It's possible to find commonality and hope in the midst of darkness. And yes, if you believe in God, great. But see God as being in solidarity with humankind, not as opposed to humankind. So that's our inspiration segment. I'm now going to move on to talking, and this next part is our information time. In each of our webcasts, we do this: inspiration, information, interaction. Speaking real quick, though, I want to mention that if you're watching this on Facebook Live, please send us your comments. We'd love to have your thoughts on what we're doing. Along the way, please, at any moment, feel free to post some comments. Like, I'm going to go and just check and see if we have any new comments along the way. So anyway, continuing onward, last week, if you had a chance, or no, I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago, we had a conversation with Jeff Patterson of the Objector Church and also the Executive Director of Courage to Resist. He and I talked about the possibilities of a future military draft, the idea of conscription coming to the United States. Well, since the time of that webcast, there's been some really good, well, not good stuff, but some pretty significant news. And I'm going to pull this up real quick, and we'll share the link on the Facebook Live feed. But about the commission that has been studying, let me pull this up real quick here, that has been studying the Selective Service, the issue of our current draft that's in, the current system of draft registration and how that all could play out. And so that commission has come out, and they have basically, they are in many ways propping up the old system, arguing that maybe it should be expanded, that women should be drafted. They mentioned the issue of special skills draft. They've also talked about the issue of alternative service, but also the idea of some kind of compulsory service that everyone has to do, either voluntary or involuntary in nature of this. Basically, what's clear to me from this report and other things is that the chances of a draft in the future are a little bit higher than maybe they looked a few weeks ago. I don't want to scare people unnecessarily. Certainly the resumption of a draft or some kind of compulsory voluntary service or involuntary service of some kind would require congressional action and action by the U.S. president. But I see very little evidence that Congress or the president wouldn't jump to do this if they thought that the nation was at risk in some way. And so we at the Objective Church are urging everyone to give thought to what you would do if you were called for a draft. And to also think with other people in your life who may have never asked this question before. Particularly for teenagers and young adults, this issue is really important, particularly since women may be drafted now. They have not been drafted previously, but the commission talked at length about the idea that women could be drafted. So we at the Objective Church are urging you to give thought to these questions, to think of other people that need to ask these questions, and then to back this up with action. On our website at objector.church, and I believe it, let's see, objector.church. And then from there should be a link at the top of the page for CO registry. In fact, the direct link for that is objector.church/register. So I'm going to post that on Facebook live stream right now. I encourage you to check that out. There's a lot of information there of what conscience objection is all about and what you can do now to document your views. And we at the Objective Church are providing a lot of resources there and a lot of assistance in various ways. One of the biggies, and we'll have a lot more information about this in the coming weeks, is also becoming a member of the Objective Church. It would be a great way to document your opposition to war and to support this growing movement. So anyway, that's one bit of information. Second bit of information we'll talk about is the future of this weekly webcast. We had a board meeting for the Objective Church recently, had a lot of conversation about this webcast. And so I want to share with you as a congregation, the folks out there watching, we want to get your input because we're thinking about making some changes. One of the things we'd say, looking at our past history of webcasts, and at this point we have a dozen or so, I think, of past of our meetups. In fact, I'm going to pull up here. I can see. All these are on our website at objector.church. So we have, looks like more than a dozen here. And I'm proud of them. I think there's some good content here. We've had some great interview format programs with some special guests. Jeff has been on several times, at least a couple times. We've had Anya De Marie talking about the spirituality of dance and music. Serena Blaze has talked about non-theistic spirituality and what that means, particularly for someone who's who's an atheist, what it means to be engaged with spiritually based activism with people who are more traditionally religious. What does that look like? We've had conversations with Dwight Welch, a campus minister and autistic person up in Montana. We talked about with him, he and I are both, by the way, on the autism spectrum. So we had a great conversation about what does it mean, what is it like to be on the spectrum and to do ministry and to do activism and do all the other things in life. And then we had an interview a while back with Blake Lemoyne, a war resistor, but also someone who's forming a new church that's focusing on feminine spirituality and particularly also focusing on Gnostic ideas of Christianity. We've had a lot of good content. We also have had some one-person shows, which is me speaking on a topic. But even in those, we've had a lot of good interaction at times, a lot of good input from folks. That's the good news. Bad news is we've had more than our share of technical difficulties along the way. This has been tricky to figure out. I'm not a professional at video stuff at all, so it's been a learning process. But more than that, we've also really struggled to find our audience. And we've tried changing the times of our live webcast, but it seems like the live side of it is really hard to take off. And so one of the things we're debating about is whether we will continue doing our same pace of live webcast or whether we will continue to make good content, but do more of it in a pre-recorded format. And so that it's not, it's a little bit less labor intensive, but also enables us to have stuff that's more finely scripted, more carefully crafted. So we're considering that. Now, my hesitation about leaving behind the live webcast is I still feel like as a spiritual community, as an activist community, I really like the idea of it not just being a one-way conversation of one speaker or a few speakers talking to people, but rather it being give and take. It's being real conversation. And so we're exploring some possibilities. One of the possibilities we're looking at is maybe continuing to do live webcasts, but they be intentionally more informal in nature. It basically be who shows up, but we wouldn't focus on these as being something that would be more edited up later for our archive. In other words, we would do pre-recorded things that would be their own thing, and we do the live thing as its own thing. So that's one of the possibilities. We're looking at several ideas, still not sure about this, to be honest. What I can see is that this current pace isn't sustainable because of doing these live webcasts, just because we need, without more members, without more active participation, it's not really gonna work. And so again, the question is, do we move more in a pre-recorded format but continue to put out good content, or do we keep slugging away at the live thing, hoping it'll take off? Or do we keep doing a little bit of live stuff, but we make it more informal in nature and focus our more scripted stuff for the pre-recorded? I don't know the answer. I'm still sorting this out, and we as a community are sorting this out. What's important to me, though, is that those of you who are watching this can give us some input. And by the way, I mentioned, for those of you who aren't watching live, that is A-okay, because I want to hear from you, particularly, is it important? Would you tune in to a live webcast if it was at the right time, or is pre-recorded A-okay? I know for myself, I often am more likely to watch stuff or listen to stuff at my own convenience. I do a lot of podcasts. I don't listen to a lot of live stuff myself. And so I don't know if other people are on that boat or not, but I'm also concerned that we won't have enough interaction if we don't do something live. So we'd love to hear from you. Shoot me an email, james@objector.church. Send me your thoughts. Of course, post on our Facebook Live here what your thoughts are as well. So anyway, I'm checking real quick on Facebook to see if we have any comments. Rena told me to not quit my day job. I agree with her. I am not a professional singer. I only play one on web TV. Also want to thank Jeff and Rena both for watching tonight. I don't see anything else, so unless I'll give it another minute or two, but otherwise we will call it for tonight. My anticipation is we will have some kind of webcast next week, but if we end up moving the direction of less live stuff, it may be, I'm not sure about the format, but for now, if you want to watch us live, go ahead and put it in your calendar for next week. But I really want to hear some input from folks, whether we're going to keep doing this live, same time, same place, whether we're going to do more pre-recorded. Really want to get some input. It'd really help us a lot. So anyway, with that, I will thank everyone for participating, and thank you so much that all the comments, everything else you do means so much to us. So we will see you soon, and take care.